Hello, I'm Mark, and this is the Fast Track Impact podcast for researchers who want to be more productive and achieve real-world impacts from their research. So in this episode, we're going to think about what you can do to get the best possible mark for your amazing impact. You are entering into REF2014. You think you've got a great impact case study. You've drafted it, but actually, is there something you could do with that great evidence you've got, hopefully, and that great story that you've got to tell to write that in a way that is going to get you the marks that you believe you deserve? Now, the evidence that we've got in the paper that we've just read to you in the last two episodes that have gone out this week alongside this provides us with the strongest, most robust evidence that we have to date of what actually made the difference between 4-star versus low-scoring case studies in REF2014. And whilst that is a retrospective evidence base, and we need to judge that as, I would argue, the minimum for what you need to do at the top end, it's going to be harder this time round. There's a granularity in that analysis, I think, that is incredibly useful. Now, Bella Reichard, who's here with me, lead author of the paper, and myself, we both do impact case study reviews for universities across the UK. And what we're going to do in this episode is to think about how we apply the evidence in our research to actual case studies. And we're going to go through the structure of the impact case study template. And we're going to anonymise these, but we'll just go from our own experience of the kind of really common mistakes that we see, the most common suggestions that we make, and some of the things that we like best that we've seen from other people's practice. And we'll try where possible to refer back to the paper, so you get a sense of how this evidence base can be operationalised. So hopefully this is going to be useful. And let's start with the heading. Now, I should bear in mind at this point, actually, we potentially may or may not agree with each other. One of the things I really enjoy about reviewing with you, Bella, is that you often pick up things that I would miss, partly because of your linguistics training and expertise, and just because you're a different person. You get two sets of eyes, it's always a good thing. And we quite often come together to discuss quite tricky bits of feedback where we're just not that sure, and there's lots of different ways it could go. And we don't always agree, but I think the discussion is always instructive, and quite often there are just two very different ways of doing it. So let's see where this goes. So yeah, shall we try the title to start with? What makes a good title for you?
It's a bit flat to say informative, but that is what it should be. It should tell me what the impact was, what you did, and ideally, if you can get some reach in there as well, kind of an indication of what you're looking at. But that's optional. The most important thing is what is the impact. I've recently seen quite a few titles that look like research project titles, and that's not going to work for an impact case studies. I need to know what you did to what effect.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree, and I think there are three things that I see. I see research-based ones, so it looks like a research paper title. Even worse than that, a textbook title, so it's like a thematic kind of thing. The second thing is pathway, and actually if you've got an impact case study title that is effectively your pathway, then I'm instantly signposting the reader to the fact that this is going to be a low-scoring case study that's going to talk all about the pathway without ever telling me what the impact is, which, based on our research, is pretty much the number one reason for doing badly last time round in REF2014. So that's not an impression I want to give. So the key thing is that whatever else is in there, that there is an impact in the title. I get a sense of what the impact is from the title, because that's the point. It's an impact case study.
And one way you can try and make that visible once you know what impact to put in the title is to try and remember to use a verb, such as... This is a really flat example because I can't give any real ones, but influencing policy on da-da-da-da in this and this and that way, or changing uptake of whatever it is in this kind of area. some kind of verb helps to make the link to what your role was in generating the impact. And I like to see that too.
Yeah, and then you've got the question of how strong we make this. So is it changing, or is it influencing, or is it actually shaping, or something like that? And there's a lot of discussion that I have with case study authors about, well, actually, you know what, shaping is you're going too far because it didn't really shape the entire thing, but we did inform it. Or maybe you can move from inform to influence. Maybe that's a little bit stronger. So yeah, so it's not overclaiming and sounding too kind of Yeah,
what you say there about those words, I agree with that. Scale that you just said, with that from informing on the one hand to shaping on the other, I agree with that. However, not necessarily in the title. If all you did was inform, that may be part of your impact, but informing, I would hesitate to put that in the title. It doesn't look very strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you've got something stronger that you can put in the title. Yeah, I agree. So I'm constantly trying to change it up. So let's replace informing with something stronger, and go for the strongest we can. Stop where you overclaim.
But if you've got something that actually was weak, absolutely, a bit in the title, because instantly I'm signposting, this is going to be weak. Length as well. I think fairly short is good. When you're getting to the end of the second line, you're beginning to lose track of what this is all about. And I've seen 3-line titles, and that's definitely not a great plan. Yeah,
I would like to be able to read the title once and know what it's about. The minute I have to start reading, the second I have to start reading a title for the second time is already a minus point.
Cool, so let's move to the summary then. So if you haven't listened to the end of the last episode, let's just run through some of the key things here. I provided a rule of thumb, which is that I think that approximately 50% should be a kind of a minimum for the amount of this which is dedicated to impact. And for me, that's a rule of thumb because the focus, again, should be on impact. And it's very common, I see, that it's just the last sentence that is actually about the impact. And you've got all of this. You've got a problem statement, and now we've got the research, and now we've got the pathway, and we've got more pathway. And then, what you can say in one sentence is fairly limited. What are some of the things that we want to see in terms of impact? So I've got some other stuff in there, maybe a problem statement, a bit of research, a bit of pathway, but the key focus is we've got to the impact. What are the key things that you want to see in relation to impact in the summary?
I would like to see what the nature of the impact was. So I'm making a distinction here between type of the impact. I'm making this up, but between type of the impact and nature of the impact. So someone might say, and in this way, we have had impact on, we have had economic impact and social impact and whatever else impact on this community. And I'm thinking, okay, but in what way have you had economic impact? In what way have you had societal impact?
So we want the specifics
a little bit
rather than generality.
Content rather than heading.
And it is a summary, so you can see why people go to let's just summarise with these very vague categories, but it's so bland, I don't know what it is. I've got no idea really what's going on here. So I think if you've got lots and lots of different impacts that you need to talk about and you can't fit them all into the summary, then I think it's better to highlight a headline or anchor, your most impressive one, and to give us a sense of the shape of that, what it was and why it was significant and how far-reaching it was, and then allude to the fact that there are all these other allied impacts which you'll be able to read about. But you've got a sense of, that's impressive. Wow, I can't wait to read about that. I can get my head around that. Oh, and there's more. Fantastic. Rather than, just vagueness. Yes,
fully agree with that one. Also, one danger, if the impact is hidden in the last sentence, the next thing that happens is you have to read the underpinning research, and then the nature of the impact just kind of is difficult to keep in mind while reading the research section if the reader doesn't quite know what the impact is going to be. So I would say it is a very good idea to have what Mark just outlined, a good nature of it, and how to say, a good hook into the impact, making me curious about the impact and giving me enough to remember what I'm about to read.
Yeah, yeah.
While I pause that and read the research that may have led to that.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I think in terms of the language, I'm wanting this to be fairly clear and simple, so I'm going to be able to read this quite easily. And yeah, the full description can be a bit more technical, a bit more involved, a bit more in depth. But I want this to be quite just, I'm reading it, I'm scanning it, great, that's what this is all about. And there's something, like you said, that hook that I'm now, great, I want to go and see what this is. And I quite often find myself instantly skipping to, really? That sounds crazy. I can't believe that it's actually that impressive. And I'm instantly going and looking for the evidence and, okay, great, there's the evidence. Okay, so I am going to trust what they're saying in this. That's impressive. And then I'm going and reading the underpinning research. But yeah, it's nice when you get that kind of wow factor.
Yeah, and just on the presentational issue and language issue, acronyms in section 1, I would say only if it's something like NHS. Any other acronyms that you're going to use a lot, definitely spell them out in section 1, but perhaps consider spelling them out again at the beginning of section 4 to remind the reader of what on earth you were talking about. And I find that quite often that I get to section 4, having read section 2 in between, and I think, oh, what was this again? I think you've defined it, but I don't remember.
Yeah. And then I'm doing a word search for it, but if it's in paper, I can't do that, and then it's just really frustrating. Yeah. Okay, good. So let's move to the underpinning research section. So we've got an indicative maximum of 500 words. We know in REF2014 most people exceeded that a bit, but we're looking at, I think, was it 560, 530?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Of an average length.
Yeah, for high and low, no significant difference. So yeah, on that word limit, for me, anything over 600 words is definitely too much, and I'm asking what could be cut. And for something particularly complex, I'm not going to rule out that you might have to spend more than 600 words, but for me, as soon as you're up in that range, you're potentially taking away space that you could have used in section 4, which means that you've got less room to really evidence and sell the impact. This is an eligibility check after all, so let's keep this as short as possible. And if you can do this fairly short, and in some cases, I've only got 1 or 2 papers that I'm having to describe, then there's nothing wrong with actually doing it in 300 words.
Yes. However, I would also say, because you mentioned the evidence that we have from the 2014 case studies, that was a page limit of 4. Now we have a page limit of 5. So my conclusion was slightly different. I would have said, 500 to 600 is fine. If you have to go slightly over 600, it's less of a problem than it would have been last time.
True.
And if you keep... Because the indicative word limits are the same as last time round, but the page limit has increased. And then there's section A, which may take up to half per page, depending on how many people you have to put in. But essentially, you've got half or 3/4 of a page more to play with. If all of that goes into section 4, then yes, as Mark says, it's great. You have a lot more space to evidence your great impact, but also it kind of skews the balance a little bit. And that's not a given, but I would be less concerned with 600-word research section.
I think we're probably splitting hairs in terms of the precise number, but I think the emphasis here is, strategically speaking, section 4 is where you're going to get the majority of your marks. Yes, you need to be able to corroborate it. So we'd have some stuff in section 5. Yes, I need to be able to summarise and signpost it. So we've got a great title and summary. But ultimately, it's going to hinge on whether those great claims I've made in my summary are actually evidenced. And so for me, of those extra pages, I want to put as much of that extra space to section 4 as I can. I think strategically that's going to get you the most marks. But to be honest, most researchers struggle to get to 500 words, and I'm not going to punish anyone for it. Yeah, get down to that. So yeah, I'm not going to punish you if you've got 600. That's fine. But yeah, 700, 800. No, yeah, that's an issue, definitely.
Yeah. Can I just ask you a live question?
Yeah.
About a case study which actually I'm having a chat with the author about tomorrow. I'm not going to say who and where, obviously. But they were putting a lot of the pathway into the underpinning research section. And initially I thought, oh, that's a, clever way. And then I found that actually they were describing the project, their pathway project that arose from the research and that they distinguished from the impact, which we would say normally, yes, great. But all the kind of details and the reach of the pathway project was in section 2, and that was getting a little bit too detailed for me and getting a little bit too far away from the from the research that they were supposed to be describing. And then I started section 4, and I thought, I'm missing the details of the project here. And then I thought, oh yeah, that's because you put them in section 2, and because of the way my brain works and where I expect, because I'm so wired to this template by now, where I expect the information.
So it's a really
what would be your take on that?
Yeah, so there's not one right answer on it, is there? But it's a really common thing, especially for very applied research and action research type projects. And it's just, in that case, it's one of those.
It's main panel C, I think I can say that.
Yeah. Okay, so what you've got here is the reality in an action research kind of project is that, well, the impact is the research and the research is the impact, and the two are intimately entwined. So this is kind of people power type stuff, and these people have come and they've got this agenda and they've asked you to help them with it, and you're researching as you go, and you're writing that up in terms of your research, and you discover you're writing the pathway to impact because the pathway to impact was the research, and the two are totally fused. And so for a panel like that, I think you can probably get away with it because they understand the nature of that research, but I think that it could be problematic. So there are two reasons. One is the reason that you've given, which is that you expect to see the pathway.
Just the effect on the reader, which is my view.
You're looking for that pathway normally at the beginning of section 4, which is where in the template it suggests that you explain what the pathway was. But secondly, there's an issue potentially in terms of how the research is perceived. Now, in the REF2014 template, it tells us that we need to put a justification of the quality of the research in section 3. But in REF2014, that was integrated into section 2, and a lot of people I know are doing that again. And you can do it in different ways. So in terms of articulating the quality and especially around the robustness and the rigour of the research, people are doing that as they're talking through section 2 and integrating that in. And I think that's fine. By the end of it, you've got this really clear impression, wow, this was properly rigorous stuff, great. And that box is ticked. But I think the danger is that, depending on my sub-discipline and my perception, I'm reading through what is meant to be research, and I'm thinking, this isn't research. This doesn't look like research according to how I would describe research. Where is the generation of new knowledge? What is original about this? This is a bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff with stakeholders. And so it creates this impression that, is this research? Isn't it research? And are there issues with the quality? And so what I recommend to action researchers is to do a very uncomfortable thing and actually divorce the research from the pathway and the impact, and create a more linear narrative, even if that wasn't quite the reality of how it worked, because you have got these aspects, and as you go back through your papers, you can pull out the things that, that is the original significant academic contribution, and I'm going to pull that aspect of the paper out and articulate that now as the research finding. And then all that other part of the paper that was about then how we developed that and used that and applied that and how it made a difference. I'm going to then pull that out and separate it and put it in as a short pathway to impact section, or I might label it as pathway to impact at the beginning of section 4, or I might have it as an unlabeled introductory section. And then there's this kind of distinction of, that's the research, those are the research findings, it's clearly 2-star or and above, and now here's the pathway and the impact. But some case study authors, you'll find out how it goes tomorrow, find that quite problematic. And you know what, ultimately, you can make an ethical decision about how strategic I want to be versus how realistic I want to be in terms of, that was the messy, complex reality of how it was, and go for it. But it may not go well.
I think that's a key issue that you just said, because in the guidance, the REF panel are very clear that research and impact, that the relationship does not have to be linear. I remember highlighting this in my paper copy of the guidance. So if you are listening to this and thinking, but REF says it doesn't have to be linear, no, it doesn't. But it will help the reader if you, guide the reader through what is going on and make it look, not make it look like it was linear, but tweak the narrative, not away from reality necessarily, but to make it easier for the reader to slot that into the expectations about how research and impact may be related.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue this is it's narrative cohesion, and there are lots of different ways of getting a cohesive narrative. And one is, I'm going to give you a temporal narrative of I did this and then I did that, and that was reality.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be temporal.
But there's many other ways that I can argue of how this all fitted together, and so for me, there is a line that you cross when this is no longer representing reality. But to say I made an academic contribution and these were my research findings, and then to say that we then use these insights to do something and I'm separating them and linearizing them, for me that's not ethically problematic, generally speaking. But it creates a clearer narrative. So if I'm in a hurry, I can see, right, so I want to know what was the impact and how was this underpinned by good research. So there's the research, there's the impact. I can see how they link. Great, job done. So I'm just making it an easier job for the reviewers when I linearize it. And going back to our evidence from the paper, I think it's the qualitative analysis in particular, but there have been other papers, an interview-based research, in different panels. I think the most interesting one was in the maths unit of assessment. Laura Meeher wrote a paper on this. Lots of different bits of evidence, including ours, that suggest that the high-scoring ones very often linearised and simplified this narrative compared to when you interview the researchers, what was for them a much messier, complex, circular narrative as it felt from their perspective.
Yeah. That's helpful advice.
So other things in the underpinning research, I think there are essentially two things that you need to do in this. So it's communicating your research findings as they underpin the research and communicating their quality. And you can begin to put in elements about quality in section 2. We've been asked to do it in section 3, so I'm maybe going to do it properly there or use some indicators there just to back this up. But for me, the key thing is that I've got research findings, and I see a lot of case study authors who do this with subheadings. So these are the 3 findings or 3 themes, for example, that kind of stuff. So I can quite quickly see, right, that theme, that finding, and that clearly links back through to this impact and that impact, and you've got that connectivity. And then, of course, in the text as well, you're referring back to the research and to those sections, so you get that all adding up. But instead, quite often in the weaker ones, there's this big long narrative before you get to the research findings, or the research findings are buried in this really dense text.
Yes.
So I don't want all of the process, and this is one of the findings we found, our 4th finding in the paper. The low-scoring ones have all of this stuff to do with the process and the output. And actually, I want to know what the findings were. And I don't want to know all your findings. I want to know the findings that are pertinent to the impact. So make it clear, make it obvious, and keep your eye on the ball in terms of what you're asked to do in this section.
Yeah, not much for me to add there, I think.
I think in terms of linguistic style, I'm interested in what you think. This is the section where I think you can get away with the most disciplinary jargon. Yeah, we don't want this to be completely unreadable, but there is often quite a lot of quite challenging stuff. And there's a limit to this, because quite often I read this and I'm just like, what? And I've read it 3 times and I still have no idea what this research was. But at the same time, quite a lot of disciplines, you just can't get away. It's unavoidable. You're going to have to use the word for this really complex process.
Yeah, and that's where I'm being honest as a reviewer. And if I ever happen to be commenting on your case study, then you might find comments in the margin saying, will this be obvious to anyone working in your UOA?
Because we don't know that. Yeah. Maybe it is.
And I phrase it like that by saying, well, will this be obvious? Will this be clear? Is this term, I mean, you'll know the answer to that, but is this term used in the same way in different corners of your disciplines? Things like that as well. Will it be so? Will it be obvious? That's the one thing. Will it be obvious? Do they have to think about it? If they would have to think about it, make it such that they don't have to think about it, but can just read and understand it. And will it be obvious what you mean by this term, or what you mean here? Not will it be obvious what it might mean to someone else working in the same UOA, using the same term but in a different way.
Yeah. Good. So let's move to references to the research. So Bella, what are your key bits of advice that you give on a regular basis on this? This was something that I think was more analysed in our thematic analysis, because this was actually extracted and removed from the
that was not part of the linguistic analysis, because it doesn't really contain language choices as such, not in 2014 anyway. I think I'll refer that back to you, because what I say, the comments that I make here are what I've learned from you, so I'll let you say that.
Yeah, okay, well, so first there's a space issue. There are more and less space-consuming ways of formatting these lists. So we've got one sitting in front of us with lots of subsections in terms of whether they're journal articles or book chapters or whatever else, and that's I don't need to know that.
It's a first draft though, so at that stage maybe it might be okay.
But I think you've just wasted some space there with a heading and a space between the subheadings.
Yeah, they should not submit it like this.
Yeah. And well, maybe what I'm doing is I'm now signposting, depending on my discipline, there's maybe some weak stuff here, there's some book chapters, maybe I need to I don't know.
That's something that I say, is this a prestigious avenue in your discipline?
So that then, let's have a think about that in terms of indicators. So one of the things we need to do is to indicate the quality of the research, and we're asked to do that. And prestige of publication outlet is one indicator that we can use, but of course highly controversial. So in terms of the formatting of this, I've got lists of outputs. And quite a lot of people will then add lists of indicators, and one of the most common indicators people will include will be funding. Now, you have to submit every single bit of funding as part of the metadata, but the panels don't get to see that. So there's not a requirement that you have to describe all of your funding here, but it is an example of an indicator that can be used. And so for me, this is now, if you've got a lot of funding, so for my case study, we've got over 20 different funding sources, I could spend an entire page detailing all of that, and that would be very, very bad strategy. So I've not actually added this into my own case study yet, but when I do, I'm going to be doing this as 2 or 3 lines that say, this is the number of projects, the total value, and now a list of all of the funders. And if I'm going to privilege any, I'm going to talk in more depth about what in my discipline would be the gold standard stuff, so the UKRI funding. And it was a flagship, $1 million+ project, etc. And I might just kind of give that a little bit more space to allow that to shine, because most people will then say, well, this must be above 2-star research, given that it was part of that project. Now, of course, it's an indicator, so this is not reality, and we all know that rubbish research gets published from fancy researchers and research groups and projects. And so what's controversial about this is that when the panels that have told us to use these indicators when they do this, they're giving examples of things which are actually things that will bias a reviewer towards believing that it's high quality rather than actually being evidence of high quality. So the fact that it's in a peer-reviewed journal, well, all of the one-star research that I've ever read has been in a peer-reviewed journal as well.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's in a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean it's 2-star or above. And I forget all the other ones that they've got there. So effectively, you are looking for these things that will make people feel impressed, and so then the prestige is that journal that, for my discipline, we know is the journal, or it's not just a book; it's a monograph, and it's published by that publisher. And yeah, it's not just that it's peer-reviewed. Now here is a review by this person in this outlet of my monograph, and now I'm thinking, yeah, this must be really impressive. Now, of course, there could be some completely panning review that says the opposite, which I'm not including in there. So yeah, it's potentially misleading. But so I'm asking, how can I list these indicators in a way that is going to be very space efficient? So for me, this is not per article.
Unless there's one article that has a specific, very good indicator, such as one of the ones in the list and the panel criteria that it's won a prize or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then you might, one of those rare ones
Yes.
that actually fit into the criteria that they, or the suggestions that they make, then that could be at that particular.
If you can do
paper.
that space efficiently in brackets or with an asterisk
Yes.
or something like that, then yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking brackets and italics.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And also making a cross-reference. This was done in 2014, quite a lot of case studies. The fact that this is also in the output section. I wouldn't rest on that.
I was going to say, would you encourage that?
So I wouldn't encourage it, no, and I'm not doing that in my case study. I see it quite often, people do it, and if people want to do it, then I'm okay with that. And the reason that it's not a priority is that it's quite a fallible indicator, because we know from REF2014 that quite often people would look at case studies just in terms of the panel process, potentially before they'd reviewed those outputs. So actually, yeah, at this point I need to make a decision. Is this high quality research? And I can't just cross-refer and find out what grade that got. You could potentially refer back to REF2014 scores, but that only works if you know that your output profile was all above 2-star. If it was, in theory, you could refer to that and say, well, this was submitted and got to 2-star or above, we know from REF2014. But yeah, it's one thing that you could potentially add into the mix. But what is not good, I think, is when you see a couple of lines now per article or output justifying why that is 2-star or above. That's now doubling the length of this as a section. And we have to bear in mind that we're asked to judge the quality as a body of work. So I can now look at all of that and create a bit of text at the bottom that explains why as a body of work this is 2-star or above.
Yeah, so I routinely put a comment like that in section 3 saying just justify with some narrative. I had a case study recently where I did not do that because it was just so obvious from section 2 that it was just so good. I mean, it was they had justified this was the first to look at this first study of this kind to look at this really big problem with this sample size and this kind of cohort and this coverage of potential participants in the study, and I just thought, wow, that was super impressive. So I thought, well, you can't really miss that. Yeah. So there's no need to duplicate that.
Yeah, I know one other
that's rare.
REF reviewer consultant who recommends that people do the full justification of quality in section 2 and integrate that in, and then you don't need to do it there. I put this question out to the Association of Research Managers and Administrators. What are you advising people to do, and what are you doing in your institution in section 3? And one of the most common responses was actually nothing. Yes, the REF guidance says very specifically that you need to justify the quality in section 3. We are ignoring that, and we're not including any information on that at all, because we're trying to save space. And actually, these are in journals or they're monographs published by publishers that anyone in that discipline instantly looks at and knows this is incredible. So why waste the space when we know that everyone will instantly see this as high quality? And in some ways, it's actually calling attention to the fact that, you know what, I'm going to let this speak for itself without having to talk journal impact factors or citations or anything else.
Which are actually not one of the indicators to put in.
No, so it's interesting. It's quite conspicuous by its absence. So it doesn't. So elsewhere in the REF 2014 guidance, it
for outputs
outlaws journal impact factors and tells you whether or not you're allowed to whether they're going to use citations. You're still, if they are going to use citations in your panel, you're still not allowed to include it because they'll get that from Clarivate on the day. But when you look at the list of potential indicators of quality you can use, both of those are conspicuous by their absence. And then there's one criteria, which is effectively citations in another word, but without using the word citation. So it's the fact that it's being used widely beyond your discipline and evidence that it's being used widely. I'm not quite sure how you do that without using a lot of words, without citations, but it's very clear that that's not there. So I'm suggesting people don't use citations, despite that the fact it's not been explicitly outlawed in the REF part, in the impact part of the guidance.
Yeah, and about the question where to put that and whether to have an additional something or whether the evidence speaks for itself. For the particular audience, whether it will be obvious to any potential assessor. If that's the case, then absolutely fine. If not, I would err on the side of helping the reader to tick the box, putting yourself in the shoes of the reader who have to read this very quickly, potentially, or many in quick succession, and just giving them that little bit of a hand to not have to worry about, is this going to be good research or not?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're still relying on you, but on what you say.
Let's just make their job easy, absolutely.
Yes, very much so.
So, plan A, perhaps, it's just so obvious from that list. I need to say no more. I'll let it speak for itself. The plan B is... And
ideally have that corroborated with someone working in a different part of the UA.
Yeah. So that might feel great to me, but yeah, absolutely. This is going to have to really clearly speak. Plan B is I'm listing indicators. There are examples in the REF guidance. In our paper, we've got a table with lists of indicators that we found.
In famous table 17 in our current.
Indeed, that's right. So have a look at the paper. You see more ideas there. And on my blog, my latest REF Intelligence blog, I've just been collating ideas as I come across them in universities where I'm looking at REF impact case studies. Great idea. I'll add that to the blog. So there's quite a lot of indicators you can choose from, and you can get quite creative. But if at the end of the day you have no indicators of quality, and especially if you think there might be things that might ring alarm bells for people, so this is not peer reviewed, it's a final report to a funder, for example, then your final option is to integrate a narrative justification. So, for example, as you just described, that can be integrated into section 2, or I can create a narrative justification going through the output criteria with a justification for why, as a body of work, this is original, it's significant, and it's robust. Although that's not in the guidance, the REF team have said that is an acceptable option for demonstrating that, and that was the primary way in which people did it in REF 2014.
And it should not be very long. When we say narrative justification, we're talking 1 or 2 sentences.
Yes, yeah, like 3 lines, that kind of thing. Yeah, because again, it's an eligibility check. So, shall we go to section 4? Is there anything else we need to say on that? Are we good on that?
I think we're all right for section 3. If not, if there's any more questions that you have, do get in touch. I mean,
indeed.
I'm not promising more answers, but you can always try.
So, first thing in the details of the impact section, I've seen lots of different things. So sometimes I've seen problem statement. So it's often first sentence of a summary and then expanded a bit more. There's maybe a short paragraph or half a paragraph just really explaining the problem. And depending on your impact, that can be quite powerful, where I'm saying, well, for my own case study, for example, it's all about peatlands. And I love peatlands. I've worked in them all my career, and it's obvious why peatlands are important to me. Tom McDaniel, impact officer in our school, reviewed my first draft of my case study. It's like, yeah, it all feels a bit marginal. I mean, it's just peatlands. I mean, why are peatlands important? And I'm like, do you not realise that they're the world's largest carbon store, and they store almost twice as much carbon as all the world's forest, and the fact that they're degraded is a key reason why we're going to miss our climate mitigation targets. And all these other things. Like, that sounds quite important. Well, why didn't you tell me that? Yeah, it wasn't that obvious, was it? So a problem statement that kind of gives that context for where someone else might say, sounds a bit marginal. Actually, no, it's not because of this. It can be quite useful.
And that anecdote very much underlines that you need more pairs of eyes.
Yes.
Exactly. What we've been saying all along. Will this be obvious to anyone in your unit of assessment, even if it's, you're a supportive impact officer?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, so it's great. So yeah, Tom's been great. He's given me loads of great advice on my case study, and you might think that in theory I should know what I'm doing, but yeah, that second pair of eyes, brilliant. So problem statement is one thing you might want to go in there. The other common thing that you'll see will be a pathway to impact. So we've not got yet to the impacts per se, but there's a bit of preamble to explain how we got from the research to the impact. But here's a really big temptation, and I see lots of these which are just hugely long. So for me, a half page is already getting to, maybe too much. But you quite often see up to a page on this kind of preamble, and I'm just kind of waiting to get to the bit that I can mark you for, and I'm not getting there. So for me,
if you have less than 2 pages, you can't spend a page on something that you can't get.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's so tempting, and I think it's tempting because, well, that's what happened. That was the reality, and I spent a lot of time doing all this stuff, and it's quite impressive that we've got all that media attention, and we went to all these different policy seminars and all these different policy processes and blah blah blah. But for me, you need to ask, what is the function that pathway test is serving in terms of your scores? And for me, the key function that it is serving is attribution. So I'm going through and I'm weeding out, or what is the narrative I need in here that makes a connection from that underpinning research to these impacts. And all the other stuff is spurious detail, and I'm fairly hard-nosed on pulling that out.
That can happen not just at the beginning, but it can happen anywhere in the case in section 4. So maybe even at the end of the second last paragraph, you might throw in that you have given a keynote at this conference. And I'm thinking, ouch, for 2 reasons. Even though this may have been one of the highlights of your year,
I feel really proud of this. So
congratulations! I'm very, very happy for you. However, this could be academic impact, if anything, and B, well, then what happened next?
If it was a pathway, then I want to know, did anyone there listen and do something?
Did anything change as a result, or not change? When I say change, I include non-change, but just because you went and did this doesn't tell me that much.
Yeah, I mean, your worst case scenario, and this is really devastating, is where you get case studies where you're reading through the pathway, and there's more pathway, and then there's more pathway, and then eventually it's ended, and we never got to the impact. and at that point, you've got something which is 1 star at best, unclassifiable at worst, in terms of there is no impact here. There's nothing to see, guys.
However, at this stage, it's January now, or maybe February by the time you listen to this. There may be still something that you can do about this.
Yeah.
And hopefully the impact is there, but you are not quite sure which part of it needs to be in the case study. So what we then sometimes do, or what you can do, is to ask the question, okay, so what happened next? What happened then? What happened then? How did that change? Who heard that? Who then did something about this? And what I've seen once or twice now is that...
There are answers sometimes.
Yeah, that there are answers that people were maybe not confident to include because they were being super, super careful of over-claiming. So...
But now you've got the claim, let's go see if we can evidence it.
Absolutely. If it can be attributed, if you can make the link to your research, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's devastating is that quite often there's very little there, and these are things that people have spent their entire careers on, years and years of work, and to break the news to them that this isn't impact can be really, really quite upsetting for some people. So being able to very quickly say, well, actually, you've got two options now. One is you need to go and look to find out what happened next and do some evaluation. Or, great, you've got this fantastic platform because of all this fantastic engagement you've done. What you now need to do is to build on this
Generate
to actually
impact.
make something happen. And this is how long you've got left. So
that's the second option is getting increasingly more difficult, isn't it?
Exactly. So yesterday I was with some of my colleagues, and we're up against it. We've got until 31st of July, and we're looking for some economic figures in here in the tens of millions benchmarking this so that we're in the clear 4 CSAR category in my unit assessment for an economic impact, and we've got a £10 million potential on the table, but we've got to get that all signed, delivered by 31st of July for us to be eligible. And if it happens after that, so we're just bending all what we've got. And I've just been very open with everyone to say, well, look, the university is helping to fund this and they're allowing me to spend time with you making this happen. But there is some payback here, which is that the university wants to claim this. And that's why we're trying to do this a bit fast. And everyone's been like, yeah, cool. We all have different deadlines for different reasons. And if that's a deadline that's important to you, we'll see what we can do. So it's surprising. I'm not going to say it's never too late because it will be too late this summer. But at the moment, it still might not be too late. You still might be able to bring something back from the brink.
Yeah. I just had a thought when you said that it can be a little bit tricky to be told that this is not actually impact and that maybe this doesn't quite work. I had a case recently where of a continuing case studies. That's a whole different beast, of course. But I had this case where in the first draft that I gave feedback on, or in my first feedback round, I said, look, this is outside of the eligibility period. This is back in 2010. What you're doing with this? I said it nicely, I hope. Yes. And then they came back to me and said, well, yeah, the guideline was put in place in 2010 and it cites my research. And I'm thinking, yes, great, link established. And I've got in touch with the relevant authorities and they have confirmed that this guideline is still in place and operational. And therefore, I think it's a continuing impact. And I said, well, probably is, but you're not claiming anything beyond having shaped the policy. You're not saying anything about what effect the policy has had since the start of the current eligibility period.
And that's where the focus needs to be.
That's where it falls down for me. So it says, something that, great, that you have shaped policy back when, that is still in place, fabulous. But the claim is the shaping the policy. It's not, in that particular case, it's not anything that has happened since.
So in that case, what I'm doing is I'm saying, right, so that's not the impact, that's the pathway. And so
by now, it's it may have been impact
at the time,
last round. This time it's the pathway.
For REF 2021, you've got to reframe that because if that looks like a claim, that isn't an ineligible claim, and that's not going to do you any good. But actually, you need to know that that policy or guideline would not have been possible without our research. So that then, what I'm going to claim as the impact of that guideline since 2014 is now eligible. And so I would build that into my pathway section, and in something like that, for the avoidance of doubt, I would actually clearly label that paragraph as pathway to impact.
Yes.
Not claiming this, but just so you know, this is where it came from, and this is why now, in the current period, you can see this number of people have benefited from the application of this guideline.
Yes, and in a more positive example, I was recently looking at a case study that, unfortunately, like so many, or frustratingly, like so many case studies, does not fit nicely into the arbitrary cut-off dates. So They had some really good work starting in 2011 or something, that had not generated really tangible impact of sorts by the time of the last census date, but has since. But without the work that they did before the eligibility period, it would not have worked. So they had to put quite a bit of pathway in, and I let them get away. Well, I did not. I was not super rigorous in cutting all of that because it was essential to understand the impact and to have that attributed. And I said specifically, this looks really convincing to me. Just by the fact that you're labelling this as pathway, that's why I'm telling this, by the fact that you're labelling this as pathway, it makes everything else more credible.
Yeah.
It looks like you know what you're doing. It looks like you're not overclaiming, which means that whenever you do claim impact, I don't have to have this suspicion that, is this really impact? Is it eligible or not? I trust you.
Yeah. So much more we could talk about, and we could go down a whole big wormhole on continuation case studies. And for me, it's not that big a deal whether you tick the box one way or the other, whether you get it right or wrong. There's no mechanism I can see by which you could get penalised for that, and there is a lot of grey area in that decision. So let's maybe avoid that one for a moment because we're going to be here all night, and just start moving on to those impacts. So one of the bits of evidence coming out of the research that we did was your quantitative linguistic analysis showing the importance of the use of subheadings. And interestingly, Panel D, Arts and Humanities, the disciplines where you're least likely to see subheadings, certainly in a chunk of text that long, who are more likely to actually use that. The effect size was biggest in Panel D. So a very different style of writing and different way of structuring to what you might be used to in your academic work. But it's not just that there are subheadings. For me, there's something about the content of those subheadings. So ideally, I don't want just thematic subheadings. In some cases, you've got subheadings named after individuals who were involved in it, or that actually, when I read the subheadings, they're all pathway.
2, right? Is this bad examples?
Yes, this is bad examples. Yeah. So essentially what you've got is this kind of meta-narrative in your subheadings, and what does that meta-narrative tell me? Does it all read like research? Does it all read like pathway? Or does it all read like impact? And for me, I want each of those subheadings to read like impact. And ideally, in the same way that we've done with our paper, each of these is now a very short sentence that articulates what that impact is. So we're getting a really clear sense of, this impact. Right, and some people actually number them impact 1, impact 2, so absolute avoidance of doubt. Yeah, this is an impact, and it's the first one, and this is what it is. So yeah, subheadings is a useful thing. What about then the text that comes after this? So I'd be interested in what you think of this, because in my mind I have this formula, and I find the formula useful for writing an impact case study, and yet I very rarely actually see that formula, even in what I'm writing myself. So in my head, I've got this formula, which is I want to, first of all, make an impact claim. So the first sentence under my heading is, this is the impact. And I want to have an element of that impact claim which is significant, and I want an element of that impact claim that is far-reaching. It may be a single sentence, or it may be, here is what's significant, and now second sentence, here is what is far-reaching. So I've got a claim that is high magnitude, and it's a specific claim. Great. But then the next sentence after that is the evidence. I'm immediately backing that up. So that's an impressive claim. Wow, that's really high magnitude and specific and great. But now here is the evidence for the significance component, and here is the evidence now for the reach component. Now, in terms
vice versa, depending on
but it's all there, and it's clearly linked, and I can see what I need. And I think in an ideal world, that formula really works, because now as a reviewer, I've got the claim, I know what it is from the heading. Now, that's it in much clearer language now, because I've got a full sentence, and I can see the significance, I can see the reach, and here's the evidence, tick. And I've made a judgment based on that initial sentence. Yeah, that feels like 3-star, that feels like 4-star. I wonder what the evidence for that looks like. Great. In terms of how that actually reads on the page, the narrative is usually a bit more interesting than that, and it's not quite as obvious as that, but I'm still doing a checklist in my head under each of those subheadings. Have I got a claim, an explicit claim? Is it specific and high magnitude? Is it got a significance component, a reach component, and have I evidenced it? And so I think the key thing is, rather than perhaps a template or a formula, it's a checklist, and I'm making sure all of those are contained in it.
Yeah, the bit of the checklist more resonates with me, to be honest, because I rarely see paragraphs that conform to that.
No, you're right.
I mean, these are the things that I'm looking for, plus the link back to the research, with hopefully the pathway section. You know, in some case studies, it's very clear. You've got one significant research finding that has one particular application or a range of applications that perhaps, depending on the unit of assessment, are, or depending on the discipline, are evidenced through a pathway or, a patent. It's getting late. So where you've got the maybe a patent, and then you say, and this and this and this application arose from that. In a case like that, you can sometimes fairly easily establish the pathway for the whole thing in one paragraph at the beginning. Sometimes it's not as clear. Sometimes you do need some more dotted around links saying this is and this is how we know that this could not have happened without our research.
It's really case by case, isn't it?
Very much so.
In some cases it can be implicit, and that's fine. In other cases, well, the first claim is going to be linked directly back to the research. Maybe actually it's just linked back to the pathway, and the pathway is what links directly back to the research. And in some cases where you've got a really long causal chain, actually the last impact is causally linked to the previous impact in the chain. And actually what you see is, when you look at it at a landscape kind of scale, you see that connectivity going from the research to the pathway to impact 1, impact 2, and then eventually to impact 3. And you don't have to link every single one of those claims back to the original research because, well, you're then just repeating yourself. But that connectivity is necessary, and in the paper we've got all this evidence of attributional phrases and different forms of cohesion, including this kind of argumentative form. What's the technical name for it? Not the...
Is it deep cohesion?
Yeah, deep cohesion, yeah. So
that's the label.
The fact that these ideas are actually connected together coherently into some kind of an argument. And one of the bits of evidence we've got in this is it's not just that the high-scoring ones have more attributional phrases, it's that they're attributing to impact, generally speaking. So let's keep our eye on the ball the whole time, and we've got this attribution, these links in our language all the way through, all the way through this text in section 4.
While we're talking about could this have happened, could this impact have happened without the research? Especially with economic impact, I sometimes find that there's a weak link where you say, well, you know, the company has had a rise in annual turnover of whatever percentage, and then problems that often crop up here is that I'm not told from which year to what year, or I'm not told, is this just one particular product of the company? Does the company have only one product, the one that you've worked with, or is this part of a massive product portfolio? And actually, you know, how do you know that this product that you have had anything to do with, that this was driving the increase in whatever indicator they use? So I'm going to stop talking about that bit because that gets us into a rabbit hole, but it's something that I see quite often. And that's...
But how do you fix that? And quite often I think the only solution to that sometimes is a testimonial. There's no kind of evidence you can use to really clearly infer exactly what's going on in terms of that particular product or that feature or whatever it is.
Unless you're lucky enough and they've written about it in the annual report that's on the company website.
Yeah, and then when you're in that domain where it's economic impacts, very often you'd love to ask the question, but you're pretty sure they're not going to tell you because it's commercially sensitive. And I've got a blog on that. that suggests ways in which you can get that kind of data. So I'd always, first of all, just not do it by email, go and try and talk to people, because once you've got that no, it's very hard to come back from it. But I ask a difficult question, I get a no, but I've come with a bunch of sub-questions. Well, here's something that's less sensitive, might you be able to give me that? And now here's something which is actually just a proxy. So I now know that it's the market leader. And there are only 3 main companies in this market, and it's a market that's worth hundreds of millions of pounds. And instantly I know, okay, it's the market leader in a market of that size with this many major competitors up against them. This is probably something in the millions rather than in the thousands, and you get a sense of an order of magnitude, even if you haven't got the economic data that you would ideally want. So that kind of specificity, and I think there's lots of people who have these kind of, well, it's millions of, and I'm not really very sure. But that vagueness gives me a sense of, are you hiding something? Are you overclaiming? And try and ask the questions, or use some proxies, or triangulate it in some way through a testimonial to give that sense of rigour to this. Otherwise, it feels like you're waving your hands.
And on that note of specificity, something that you can normally influence is time references. So quite often I see something like over the past 3 years, and I'm thinking, is this counted from when I read this, or from when you wrote it probably 6 months ago, or is this are you counting ahead to when they might read it, which is 2021? So this project started in 2014, and over the past 3 years and I'm immediately thinking, so my advice would be to use what I call absolute time references. So between 2015 and 2018 is a lot more specific and just gives the reader a bit better indication of the scale. Especially if you say something over the past 3 years, such and such number of people have benefited from this. And by the time the person, or let me frame this differently. If you say since 2015, so and so many people have, maybe your data is or was updated in 2019, or at best by July 2021. Sorry, 2020. But the person might be reading it a year later, and then that's the same number of people over a longer time period, which actually diminishes the research. But that's something where you can very easily fix that by saying exactly for what time period you've got the numbers, so as to not accidentally weaken the scale of your claim. Again, I'm nitpicking here, but
no. And then that claim, you're going to have a cross-reference then to your corroborating sources, and I think that those references are important. So, in the examples of weak lists of corroborating evidence, you've just got these unreferenced lists. So it's just a list of URLs in the worst case examples. And I'm like, well, what does that actually corroborate? And I'm going to have to follow the link and then work out where on earth that's meant to be linked. So throughout section 4, I've got these cross references to the section 5, the corroborating sources. And I'm not wasting those corroborating sources on pathways to impact, and pretty much 80-90% of the case studies I look at, you go to section 5, and the majority of the sources are evidence that there was a pathway, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a waste when you could be using that to actually corroborate an impact, which is what we're being asked to do. Which leads me to, I think, maybe the last topic of conversation on section 4, which is evidence. Even the best case studies that I've seen over the last year, there's always something that I think, but you could just edge that evidence a little bit forward. You could do something a bit more impressive there. You could back that up. You could triangulate it, whatever. And let's bear in mind that whilst the impact has to have happened up until 31st of July, we've got until the end of the year to actually present the evidence for that. So we can continue with that evidence collection process. And you can refer back to my paper on this, which I read on the podcast at the end of last year, if you want a bit more on this. But it's surprising when you get your researcher head on and start asking yourself the question, as a researcher, how would I go about collecting this? Add in a few extra helpings of common sense, and yeah, I could ask that kind of person, and that's what I would count. And well, we're going to do a survey now. One of the most common ones that I see, which is a gift, is continuing professional development or training. And loads of researchers will do training within companies of professionals or whatever as part of their pathway to impact. And if GDPR compliant, they can go back to those people. Then there's a very easy questionnaire that I can do with a tick at the bottom. Would you be willing to be contacted? Great. I can maybe go and do some telephone interviews with a few of those people. And now these people have gone all over the world. They're now in high positions in governments. They're potentially using some of the stuff from your research that was built into that training, and they're changing the world. But you've got no idea. Who knows? So it'd be quite exciting when you go out and you start collecting that data. Just what then begins to fall out of that, but it takes some time, and yeah, I would always ask yourself: is there something more you can do to evidence this? Good testimonials, poor testimonials. This is one of the things that you'll get in terms of evidence. What makes a good testimonial?
Something that evidences impact. It sounds repetitive, doesn't it?
But rather than the pathway, so Prof Reed came and spent all this time training our researchers, our R&D team, and helped us with this and helped us with that. And at no point have you actually ever said what the benefit was. Well, great, you've evidenced your pathway, but if you just go that one step further and tell me what the impact was, that would have a little bit more value.
Yeah, certainly. Also, short. Mm-hmm. Testimonial quotations in the text should be short, ideally maybe a sentence, maybe even less, maybe 2 or 3 sentences, but anything longer than that distracts from your own narrative. And actually, the shorter not necessarily, but if you've got a short, punchy testimonial, that sounds very credible quite often. Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of you will be familiar with my approach to this, where I do an interview. I was in Madrid a few weeks ago, before Christmas, and I managed to pin down someone from DEFRA that I've been trying to interview for over a year. I've had so many missed opportunities, and then all of a sudden I bumped into her queuing up for coffee, and great. Might I be able to do that interview with you? And she was like, well, I'm now chief negotiator for UK government on whatever it is. So yeah, I've got loads of stuff on, but I have breakfast here at 8:00 before I go into my negotiators meeting at 8:30. See you here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And so in the end, it was quite clear she didn't want to talk work while she was eating. So at the end, I got 10 minutes to do my interview, but in my 10 minutes, I managed to get it. So now I transcribed that. I gave her a consent form at the time that she signed. I came prepared. I was looking for a few people. And I then sent her the transcript, and I excerpted, but also did a little bit of rewording there where what she said was quite long-winded. Once it was transcribed, it wasn't grammatically very clever. And so this was a kind of a cleaned up and shortened, this was the key thing that you said. And you can see how this is based on what you said. So, I didn't make this up. Yeah, great. And you did say at the beginning this was based on Newcastle research. So I've just added in to that bit based on Newcastle research, that's based, it's linked into the quote. Would you be happy going on record saying this? If so, can you stick it on that headed paper? And to my surprise, actually, I've been advising people, if you're working with civil servants, last time round, there was a system where you had to, the civil servant had to fill in a form, which eventually then went through a system, and then you got a testimonial spewed out from a deputy director that you'd never met once they'd done all the internal checks. In this case, this was actually someone now who's very, very senior in civil service. And she was like, I'll just stick it on lettered paper for you. And the next day, through popped on DEFRA letterheaded paper. Great. So it was a lot easier than I expected it to be. But the key thing here was that I was able to really probe and go deeper and deeper, and within 10 minutes I knew what I was looking for. I knew she was the one person who might be able to evidence this one thing that I was pretty sure was linked to our research. And sure enough, she was, and we got there. But it took some probing, and I knew what I was looking for, and great. But had I just asked her, can you write me a testimonial? A, she wouldn't have done it. It was hard enough to pin her down for 10 minutes. But B, she probably wouldn't have gotten to the nub of that one thing that was the thing that I knew was the gap in my narrative that would make that final claim really sing.
And if you've gone through all the pains of getting that testimonial and making sure you've got that one thing that you need to evidence, make sure you do put that bit in the actual Section 4 narrative, because the panel are instructed, it says it very clearly in the guidance that they're not going to, or they're not instructed to access anything for additional evidence.
Yeah, they'll look at them for audit purposes, or if there's some reason why they're suspicious or whatever. But generally speaking, they're not going to read
that. That Section 4 is your one chance.
Yeah, there was,
and everything else is around, and just whatever you want the panel to really know, put it in the main text.
Yeah,
I just wanted to emphasise that.
Yeah, and you know, you might think that's an obvious thing, but disastrously, there was one entire university in REF2014 that instructed, and it was a top-down edict, and someone in the centre had misinterpreted the guidance, and they'd said to take out all testimonials from within it because they weren't meant to be there, and across that university's submissions, they were all taken out, and I don't know what that did to their scores, but it can't have been good. Can you believe?
While we're talking about things that might seem obvious to us by now, things that I've seen recently is where, for example, the eligibility period is very clearly stated in the guidance, and sometimes I see things that, you know, the impact period is starting as 2010 to ongoing or something like that.
There's a little throwaway phrase that they've written in there because that is the reality. That's when the research project started. But instantly, it set my alarm bells ringing.
Yeah, it's not even it's not even the research project. It's the impact period. Yeah. And even if the impact started in 2010, it doesn't matter because it's outside of the eligibility period. Yeah. Exactly. So yes, great. The impact started then. However, it has now turned into a pathway. What you're claiming is no earlier than August 2013. I'm being very specific there, and I even advise to put in the month if you are going to use 2013. I say, from October 2013 or whatever, to avoid to be super clear that you're not claiming anything that happened in May that year. Maybe a bit over the top, but that's...
And if there are doubts on that, I actually integrate that into the testimonials as well. So in my 2014 case study, I moved 18 months before the census date, and we'd done new underpinning research. We'd got impact from that new underpinning research, so I had something that was going to be eligible for Birmingham City. But in all the testimonials, I asked people to say since 2012 and my name, so it was very clear that since 2012 our work with Prof Reed has done whatever it is, and now clearly I was working with them before then, but I'm asking you to tell me about what's happened since 2012, so this is clearly eligible. Being aware, of course, that University of Leeds was submitting effectively the same case study based on the work that I'd done there. So
just being very upfront about this. So what is to say, avoiding doubt about eligibility is something that it's just an avoidable ammunition that you might be giving a potentially cynical reviewer who's reading the I don't know how many of the case study on that day. And another thing that I thought was probably really easy to implement and a really obvious thing to do right now is to use the formatting guidelines. So it says...
I love how you attention to detail in these case studies. You see things that I just miss, and this is a great example.
Yeah, it's my past life as a proofreader, right? So it says very clearly, Arial 11... 2 centimetres each, all sides, and single-spaced. I looked this up just yesterday because I was looking at a case study that kind of looked a little bit different, and I was thinking, why is that? And what they'd done was use Arial 10.5. And because REFS very clearly specifies this time round, not last time round, I wonder why they did that. They very clearly specified no smaller than 11. So if you are going to do that, you are essentially cheating. And you might think that, if they're reading PDFs or printouts or whatever, they're not going to notice. However, you might get a reviewer who just reads loads of case studies and does notice that one looks kind of slightly different and is starting to wonder why.
It's just a risk you do not want to take.
Exactly.
I've spoken to people, their grant applications getting rejected on the basis of a font size thing, and you're just like, why?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And I've seen that in a few case studies recently. And I took this up with with my contact in that university and said, would you like me to make that comment everywhere? And basically I said I would recommend, as soon as you at all can, getting those formatting requirements right, because you have to do it anyway at some point. The advantage of doing it now rather than later, I mean, this is not a case of submitting to this journal and their whole style referencing. This is not a case of that. This is clear. You know what it's going to be. You've got to do it anyway at some point for this, and it takes 3 clicks, right?
Yeah.
The reason why it's important to do that now is that the page limit is the real limit. I think we started this conversation, or fairly early on, we talked about word limits, and the word limits are indicative. You can really play with them within, within the guidelines of which parts matter more than others. But the real limit is the 5 pages, and until you've formatted it in the way that is required, you don't know what your limit is. You don't see how much space you may have left. And for some, that might not be an issue. If you've got currently 4 pages, then whatever, no problem. But if you've currently got 5 and a bit pages, you want to get that right to know how much you may have to cut. Or if your case study is currently formatted in 1.5 space, then again, you might want to put in some more.
Yeah.
But you've got to notice that first.
Yeah. I am suspicious when I see very, very short case studies, and maybe I shouldn't be, because in theory, you could potentially have a 4-star case study and it's just very concise. But on a psychological level, when there's loads of blank space and you haven't used all the pages, I'm thinking that this is going to be thin on the ground.
Yeah, same here. I want you to get on the 5th page.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. Is that just subconscious bias on our part, or is that a real thing? You could probably analyse it, couldn't you? Just look at the word lengths of high versus low in total. We could do that with our data set if we.
I've done that. I mean, for the whole. Definitely shorter.
Is it?
I haven't done the stats, or don't have, but no, clearly.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. The gut feeling works. And that's the lesson. We're coming to the end now, and this is a combination of evidence and just that kind of experience that you have from having read loads and loads of these things. And of course, evidence is fallible. Even more so, our experience is fallible. These are just our opinions. So use them with care. And as you'll have heard, if you listen to the paper, there's a bunch of limitations to the paper. So use our evidence with care as well. It's very easy to overgeneralise, and impacts can be so unique, and the disciplinary context is again so unique. And you don't know who the people are, and they'll be different people. So
we only know that's not going to be us.
Yeah, exactly. Thank God for that. So we've talked a little bit about corroborating sources. The key thing is that they're specific. They're not really vague. They're linked to the claims. I like there to be something quite specific. So here's a policy document, and I'm saying, and our research is cited on page 5 to justify this particular policy instrument or something along those lines. So you don't need a lot of text, but something along those lines, so that I'm not thinking, actually that's page 5. Maybe this is just in the general introductory preamble background kind of thing. There was one case study group, actually. There were 2 case studies in this set, which were policy impacts, and they both 2 separate case studies had said we've got policy citations. I don't know why I was so suspicious, but I actually looked at the policy and went through, and I did a keyword search to find out where the citations were. And in both cases, they were in the introductory preamble, and they were in lists with lots of other references to say, yeah, generally speaking, this is what happens, and there was no actual link to the policy. In one case, in fact, I heard a second hand from another person advising someone that that they did a similar search and found that it was in that introductory preamble, and they were basically saying that that research was rubbish, and they weren't going to be doing anything to do with that, and this policy was based on other research, and they were using that as citation, but it was cited.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe you might think you'll get away with that, but you never know if they might actually read it and be suspicious. And yeah. So yeah, anything else on corroborating sources, or are we pretty much there?
I think we're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah. So final take-home messages, kind of that stand back from all of this. Here's one final kind of take-home message in this. Well, who writes this? Does someone like you write this? And I know that you do actually offer services where you really help people write stuff pretty much from scratch, and you can do that off at the back of an interview or whatever else. I mean, that's one approach. It's not the approach I would recommend. I think having a researcher doing a first draft, having that ownership over it is important, but you're going to need some really significant editing help. And that needs to not just be a writer. This is expert editing help, because if you look at the kind of very unique genre that emerged in REF2014 that the high-scoring case studies had in common, you need someone who's got that experience of just reading and reading and reading, typically an impact officer in your institution, who is able to say, yeah, that's the kind of language and this is why it needs to be simpler, it needs to be more direct, and could you just take it that one step further or not? But at the same time, I think as a researcher, you need to have that ownership where when someone says, but couldn't you just say that one extra thing? Well, actually, I can't because it didn't happen. And no, that is an exaggeration. And I think you do need to draw that moral line sometimes. Yeah. So it's getting late. And we've been going on for a very long time now. I said we could go on for ages. Where do you go from here? Well, hopefully you go to reading our paper, and that gives you even more evidence to up your game and really get the most from the impact that you've got and get the credit where that credit is due. Go to your impact officer. Well, some universities, it's a central team. In some cases, a central person who may be very overworked.
Yes.
But these are people with unique expertise. So go and get that help. Get help from them. There are an army of people out there who can give you professional advice externally. So Bella and I being part of that. I won't speak for Bella in terms of what she does. I'll tell you what I don't do, which is I don't do case study reviews. I did do that, but yeah, life got a bit too busy, so that's not something that I have time to do these days. But I do REF trainings, a couple of types. One is a full-day training with a face-to-face afternoon session, which is a case study surgery, and we're looking in depth at case studies and answering specific questions in relation to specific case studies, but all based on the evidence which we go through in the first part. And then the other is my REF webinar. So this is, I think it's 3 hours going through the evidence that is in this paper and other stuff, and then again just taking those case studies and the specific issues you've got. As many people as you want can come. They're not all going to get their questions answered, and you have to be quite targeted in what you ask and prioritise. But my experience is because it's a shared group session, a lot of the answers for one person are very useful for other people in the group as well, and it can make a really big difference. Tell us more about the kind of stuff that you're doing at the moment, Bel.
So I'm doing reviews of case study drafts. That typically takes the form of someone sends me something and I read the case study from a reader perspective. You've heard me talk about the reader quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So I will, apply everything that we've said and more to your case study. Comment on the title, comment on all the sections, comment on what's pathway, what's impact, unless you clearly label that. make some suggestions for reformulating, restructuring some sections, those kinds of things. Sometimes I make suggestions for wordings if I get the feeling that the case study is fairly advanced and it's not going to all change anyway. And occasionally when I spot an opportunity to do something what Mark explained earlier, where you could potentially get some more evidence or even generate some more impact or probe into new evidence, parts that you have not included yet, I will make that suggestion too. When I started off doing this back in the summer 2019, there was more of that. As we're getting closer to the submission deadline, I'm getting slightly more cynical.
Yeah, brilliant. So, you were saying today you just got an entire faculty's impact case studies. So,
that's an entire university.
Was it an entire university?
Yeah.
There you go, great.
Quite daunting.
So yeah.
I may be fully booked at the moment.
But if that is the case, well, get in touch with Bel.
Please do get in touch. Yeah. So it depends on what you have. If you're an academic, it's your case study, and you just want a fresh pair of eyes. So this person who sent me that massive batch to review today said, oh, it would be really, really good to get an external eye on this because I've been reviewing them for a year now. Mm-hmm. So if you and your impact officer feel that way, then do get in touch. I might be able to fit something in, and later in the spring and summer.
And you often go down and actually, so you spending a week at this university. Talking to some of those case study authors based on that feedback. So you can do that, but don't worry if the issue is that I think all of the best reviewers are getting fully booked at this point. I know many other good people, so if Bella is fully booked, I can put you in touch with other good reviewers. But yeah, this is the busiest period for people like this, so it's worth getting in soon. I'll stick this in the show notes to download the paper, which is now out. It's been a long time in coming, but we got there in the end, Bella. Hallelujah. Yes. So we said in the conclusion, I hope that this creates a level playing field. And while we've been talking about the kind of external services that do exist, you may or may not be able to afford that. And I think it's really unfair that in REF2014, some of the richer universities lavished huge amounts of resource and editing and all this kind of help on their case studies, and other universities just simply didn't have that at their disposal. And it was the academics, and in some cases the academics alone, and with pretty much no help whatsoever. And that's not a level playing field. And I think what our paper does is that it provides that evidence. It's an open access journal, and now everyone has access to that evidence. So use it wisely, up your game, and do your best. Make what you've done really sing, and get the value for the work, get the credit for the work that you've done.
Yes. In that sense, good luck for your case studies, and.
Indeed, good luck with your party planning. As the year has.
That wasn't actually what to say. What I was thinking of that,
lots of discussion of post-draft parties. We're a long way off yet. It probably doesn't feel like it yet, but you know what? Yeah, this is something to celebrate. I love reading a great case study, congratulating a case study author. There's this celebratory tone, and I hope that as we get these polished, there's going to be that sense of satisfaction that you sit there and think, yeah, no way, we did that. Wow. And be proud of that.
Yes. And I like reading case studies. I like reading about loads of different research, and sometimes I sit and think, wow, this is fascinating. I have no idea how this kind of thing works, and someone is reading it and someone is enlightened by your work.
Brilliant. So write it well, communicate it well, and you get to inspire the world, because this is public access. So great. Enjoy, put this into practice, and stay in touch.
Yeah, get in touch.